Hello and welcome to the podcast. I am Dr. Jo Winchester and I'm here joining you with the awesome Dr. Eric Hansen. Dr. Eric, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, this is a 2 for the price of 1 podcast episode because you might be watching this episode from my podcast, which is Teaching Heroes, which I host and have for the last year. And I talk about teaching and education and science communication and COVID and all sorts of things. Or you might be joining me from the Simplr Health podcast, Chewing the Fat, which I have co-hosted before. So because Eric reaches both my worlds, I said, let's do an episode. We'll double hit it and get it all out.
Of what problems we can. I like it.
Yes, awesome. And you have your own podcast too, Eric. So maybe it could be a 3-fer.
Could be a 3-fer. So Brain and Body Health Talk, which was me and one of my mates just ranting on about different types of health issues. Yeah. We're working on a separate secret project as well. So that maybe it could be a 4-fer. Could be a 4-fer.
Okay, that's good. All right. Well, why don't you tell everyone who you are, and then I'll shape the context for everyone. So off you go.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name's Eric. So I chiropractor. I originally got into chiropractic when, as a kid, I was growing up. My dad was quite a good boxer, but he told me a story about how he was about to try out for the Olympics, but threw his back out. And then, this typical grumpy old man, he decided that because he couldn't have his shot at the Olympics, he threw away all of his trophies, never boxed again. And that always seemed like a little bit of a sad story to me. So there was always that hovering around in the back of my head. And then I was tremendously unorganized when it came to the uni open day. So I walked into the wrong room at the wrong time, thinking I was going in for a Bachelor of Science talk. Yeah. But instead there was a weird guy talking about cracking people's backs, and that was supposed to help things. 21 years later, or 22 years later, here we are. Across my journey, I was sort of never really happy with just cracking things to get improvement. I always wanted to know why some people improved and some people didn't. Yeah. So that led me to study the nervous system. I did a degree out of this in clinical neuroscience. Wow. Off the back of that, started to see a lot of people with concussions and vertigo and dizziness. And then there's nothing quite like having your own kid and then starting to see some minor issues with their nervous system and function, and seeing that they're struggling a little bit with some things like socialization or schooling. So over the last 5 years, starting to study more developmental neurology using, there's a particular technique that's got quite a lot of research on it called the Malilo method. Using that to balance out my kid's brain, and then several other kids that have been coming into the clinic so that they can behave better and study harder and not go through all the stuff that I figured out I had when I was a kid and teenager growing up.
Yeah. Nice segue, because that brings us to how we met. So I have talked on my podcast before about Simplr Health and how I lost a bunch of weight. But the great thing about Simplr Health is that it's not just a weight loss program. You kind of get inserted into this environment that is about your health and well-being, the whole of it. And it's about who you are and who you can be once you've got a handle on this stuff. So I got really fascinated, being an academic, of course, as well, with all these advisors that Dean had as part of Simplr Health, and just got really interested in their practice and what they were up to. And then it was talking to Dr. Kristen Willemere, who I just absolutely love. And we were talking, and it was in a conversation with her where I said to her, look, my oldest son, there's something, I just don't know how to help him. That was what was with me. We had tried occupational therapy. We tried different therapies with him. And he was a pretty happy kid, but quite anxious. He would move around a lot in class. His handwriting was terrible. And I just felt like his grades didn't really reflect his cognitive abilities. And I don't need my kids to be A+ kids or anything like that. but just felt like he, you know, there was something there. And I said, just out of the blue, just said to her, like, and I was like, what do you think? And she said, well, maybe some neurofeedback would help to see what, maybe there's something going on in the brain that you're not aware of. And so contacted Dean and said, hey, Kristen said this. And then he immediately, because he's so great, emailed you and said, my client Joe needs help. And you replied straight away and said, call me on Thursday. And we had a conversation, and wow. And what was in that, you know, we'll talk about all of that. But what was in that first conversation with you when I started to explain about my oldest and what he was dealing with, if you remember?
What was in that conversation?
Yeah. Because for me, it was like, I felt like I told you about 30 seconds about what he was dealing with. And then you just started to list, like, I think I said, he's a bit anxious and his handwriting. And then you were like, is he this? And I was like, yes, all of those things too.
Yes. I mean, we see this kind of trait with a lot of kids, especially lately with devices on the rise and technology doing their thing. A lot of kids we're finding are starting to become more and more very left brain dominant.
Right.
So that's where, you know, generally quite high IQ, really good at manipulating technology, maths, reasoning, that's all going quite well. But then as we up and grow, especially in those younger years, the left and right brain really need to be quite balanced. But the more you stimulate one side of the brain, there's an inhibitory effect on the other side. So we're starting to see a lot of kids with quite strong left brain traits, but then the right brain's just lagging behind and it's not quite as developed as the left brain. So unfortunately, there are some so the neurological networks that are involved with some emotional regulation is all on the left. So things like happy and angry are emotions that are mainly networked in the left side of the brain. Most of the other emotions are all on the right-hand side. Then there's one specific type of attention. So short-term hypervigilant attention for a couple seconds is a left brain task. But then most sort of long-term sit there and in the classroom and concentrate for several hours is very much a right brain style networking task. So these kids that have got really strong left brain, you think, okay, the grades are poor. It's not that their grades are poor, they just can't focus, can't attention. So it's starting to head towards that kind of ADD, ADHD imbalance. And the reason for that is, they've got all of this high IQ computing power, but they just can't focus it for long enough to learn because that right not doing its job as well as it should. Well, I think the other thing.
I was just going to say, it's funny you talk about ADHD because we've kind of had people say that about our oldest, like quite a bit, and have had him tested and it's always come back like, no, he doesn't. It's like, but there's something, you know, there's something there.
Yeah, well, for me, it's, I mean, I don't really care what letters you attach to it, ASD, ADD, ADHD, ODD. It's all about trying to assess and see like what sort of brain activity patterns are we seeing. And then with that particular method, because we talked a lot about primitive reflexes with your kids. So for those at home that don't know, primitive reflexes are things that you have as a baby, but they're essentially reflexes that are there to help teach the brain how to do certain things. So we've got our like moro reflex, what you see with baby, where you rock them back and they throw their arms up. So from an evolutionary point of view, the theory is that you're falling out of it.
Swaddle them so tight to get rid of that one.
Stop stressing.
But
normally some of these reflexes, they should be pretty much all integrated by the 12 months to 18-month mark. Some of them are a lot shorter. So that sort of startle reflex, I think it's around the 4 months mark. It should be the 6 months mark. It should be gone. As some of these reflexes, for whatever reason, don't go away, they create a bit of a glitch and make it hard for the brain to take over and do the task that your flight, fight, nervous system should be doing, or like hand control, foot control. So when we see kids that have got primitive reflexes, they're usually creating a delay in cognitive development, either on the left-hand side of the brain or the right-hand side of the brain. But for most kids, it seems to be across the board that the right brain's the one that gets beaten up. So part of the work that we're doing is assessing to see, okay, what brain symmetry have we got and what side do we need to stimulate? And then what sort of primitive reflexes do we need to try and help the child to integrate so that their brain can flourish and do everything it wants, glitch-free. I've just been ranting for 5 minutes and I forgot the question that got us here.
I've forgotten too. That's okay. We can go. I don't know. We can, but you know, you're talking. What I was thinking about in that last part of what you were sharing was that, you know, any other parent like me who's taken their kids to multiple different kind of therapies. I mean, I get a lot of, you know, doctor fatigue and appointment fatigue. Yeah. Particularly because there's so much resistance often from the kids to get in the car and go somewhere. But with you, they love going to see you, even though it takes us 45 minutes to get there. We're usually in traffic. They hate driving. I mean, that was the other thing that, you know, my kids get car sick too. So that was a kind of another symptom that you identified. They hate all those things. But when I say, you know, got an appointment with Dr. Eric, they're like, yep. In the car, go, and they just do everything you say. So
well, I think the trick with this work is, like, it has to be distant. Like, it's not like we're switching on a light bulb and 2 weeks later your kids' attention issues are fixed or their aggression controls fixed. It's a consistency over time, gradually improving the neuroplasticity in the areas of the brain that we need to make healthier. So that's where, if we want to see consistency, especially in these kids with attention issues, it has to be fun. So as much as we can, we've got to gamify these things as much as we can. So virtual reality heads, all sorts of shenanigans. You know, I think I've wrestled your kids a couple of times.
I think so.
Whatever we need to do.
I was just going to share one thing that you did, but I don't think I can, involving a ball and throwing it hard.
Oh yeah, just that was a new well, so on that, the idea is so I had your kids pick up a med ball that was quite heavy considering, you know, their body weight, but the idea is lifting that way we're activating a lot of extensor tone. Generally your primitive reflexes or your nervous system drives flexor tone, so you curl up into a ball. So one way of trying to light up the brain is, okay, let's get the extensors working as much as we can. So, you know, deadlifts or med ball over the shoulder, just hopefully not med ball over the shoulder onto the ankle like we did the other day. Hopefully he's all right.
He's okay. No, I was more talking about the time where you were trying with my oldest to do he wouldn't do anything you said, and you go, well, I'll just chuck this ball at your head, and he's like, okay. So you were working on his reflexes, and that was fun.
Yeah, well, that's thinking outside the square.
Yeah. And like, tell me about the games, because that's I was just fascinated. You know, from the beginning they were playing these virtual reality games, and I was like, I thought I was trying to get them off technology, but this technology was kind of catered to what, you know, they were dealing with.
That's where, like, I think we need to all expect that technology is here to stay. I think the kids where they're sort of, you know, not getting any technology at all, while they might be quite grounded adults, they're also going to be so far behind the 8 ball compared to everyone else in the work environment that they're at a disadvantage. So technology certainly can be used therapeutically. The trick is to using it the right way. So there's a few studies, and I think they went back and used, like, do you remember old school Mario Brothers?
Yeah.
Like, you know, Nintendo, like old school. They had, I think there was like 20 odd kids playing Mario Brothers for 2 weeks, and they did an MRI before and after and found that there was changes in the white matter pathways, which is sort of the interconnection of different areas of the brain, just with playing Mario Brothers. So like, playing games certainly can change brain activity. with a lot of these kids being quite left brain dominant, and aggression being a left brain style emotion, the issue we have to be careful of is the violent content in games. So that's where, yeah, like shooting games, don't want to name names, no one's going to say this,
Yeah.
but it's shooting games, anything of a violent fighting nature is reinforcing activity in the left brain.
Yeah.
But your right brain has got a lot to do with spatial. So that's where we've got your kids playing some sort of 3D navigation game, or they go through a tunnel where there's lots of peripheral vision. So your left brain does a lot of the phobia, so like exactly what you're looking at, but a lot of the peripheral vision goes back to stimulate your right brain. So games where there's lots of stuff going on in the background does increase activity in the right side of the brain. There's a really good service, lumosity.com. I'll give that one a free plug. So it's like $15 a month or something like that.
Yeah.
But there are a bunch of brain-based games that are based off really, really old school psychology IQ tests. So most of those games work on different areas of the brain. The trick is identifying, okay, this kid has this specific imbalance. These are the games that are going to be best suited for reinforcing the weak areas, rather than giving them exercises that they're going to be naturally gifted at, which is only going to strengthen their strengths even more. And that's where, so the person, the initial neuroscientist that you talked to, mentioned neurofeedback, which is beautiful tool. We use, and I think we've got your kids teed up for a brain scan in the not too distant. So QEEG brain scans are a way of mapping out electrical activity, different parts of the brain, so that we can pinpoint exactly where we want to target with some of these games. So that's putting the two together can be great. Neurofeedback's a wonderful tool, but I think it's one of those ones that we have to stack multiple different things together to increase the likelihood of target areas getting stronger.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, because it's not like they've just got these VR sets on and are playing. You have other kind of things attached to them to stimulate different areas, is what. So that's where there's pros and cons with this. So like a lot of the research looks at some of these things in isolation. So you see things where virtual reality has an impact on parts of the brain. And then some of the other things that we're doing with your kids is transcranial direct current stimulation, so TDCS. There's certainly some good papers on that being used for a whole host of brain-based issues to influence neuroplasticity. I think we've used colored lenses with your kid as well. So again, other research showing that brain responds differently to different colors. We're using photobiomodulation, so laser therapy, to influence the metabolic health of different networks in their brain. So by stacking all of these things together, increasing the likelihood of some parts of the brain from getting as strong as we need it to. Downside is that when you want to publish research and they're going, okay, well, it works. It's like, well, I don't know. One of the 20 things I threw at them worked, but the thing is, we fixed them. So that's the. What do you care? I don't care. Because
we got the result.
That's right. Because with my oldest, it was a really, considering that we'd spend months and months and years on different therapies. Like for me, with him, it was like 5 weeks where we saw this like massive turnaround, and then that's just continued as we've progressed. And there's a handwriting sample where like it was literally almost, because he didn't do any work in lockdown, so it was like a pre-lockdown one, no writing, and then like 5 weeks into term 4, it was like so stark that he like his pride in his work, like he started to color in when he'd never had before. Like I don't know whether we ended up showing you actually, but he colored in this dinosaur we're at the dinosaur museum, and he wanted to show you because he was so proud of it. It was all in the lines, it was all neat, Big, So and I think the biggest change though with him is that because he's less anxious, he's more in the world. Like, he's more sympathetic, he's more empathetic. He was a good kid before, don't get me wrong, like that was all there, but he's so much less caught up with what's going on with him, that he's more able to, and that's had a huge impact on his friendships and how he's at school.
So yeah, that's the a lot of the times kids with similar issues where they've got that right brain weakness compared to left brain. So socialization is very much a right brain task, but also a majority of your body awareness is a right brain style task.
Yeah.
So when we see kids that have that little bit of a weakness in the right brain, there's a bit of a disconnect, like they can't really sense where they are in space, which creates a lot of anxiety feedback. Balance is usually a little bit poor. But also it's kind of like they want to make friends, they just don't know quite how to do it. And then they see other kids playing, they feel left out, and then that's a whole feedback loop. But that's awesome.
Yeah.
Glad that he's,
And then as an educator, I'd been teaching for 20 years and then had never seen, there's so much that we are taught to do in the classroom. It's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's just that, there are such big gaps in our knowledge as teachers that, I just got so angry, not at anyone in particular, no one's fault or anything, but just that I was just thinking of like my oldest, getting removed in class to practice handwriting and it making no difference, because there was something fundamentally else going on that we needed to correct.
Well, I think, that's probably a good segue into my academic story.
Yeah.
So, like growing up, I was always a pretty good left brain. I've still got some of these really, really complicated, almost architectural style drawings that I was doing in primary school. Reasonably social kid, but I was definitely, I couldn't do maths to save myself, but I was, fine detailed, which is usually left brain stuff. But I picked up a parasite when I was 10. Which was treated and got most of the sites under control, but parents not knowing any better didn't think to recheck to see if there were parasites, or we did pause antibiotics. But what we usually see with parasites, and the same can happen with other styles of infections as well, is that there's an initial wave of negative symptoms. But then either the bacterial infection or the parasitic infection creates a bit of a homeostasis where they figure out that if we're too revved up, then the body tries to kill us. So let's just hover in the background and create a little bit of an annoyance, but not enough of annoyance where, someone starts to kill us off with antibiotics. So I then went through 20 odd years of brain fog.
There's an alarm going off, and I'm just going to kill that alarm. Hang on. All right, sorry, we're back. Go. 20 years of brain fog.
Cool. So 20 years of brain fog, which pretty much melted my left brain. And so because I didn't have much of a right brain on me, that got even weaker, and then not much of a left brain. So I remember I was always, bottom class of high school because I didn't have much of a right brain on me, which is what usually is quite strong with the athletes. So it wasn't very academic, wasn't very sporty. Schooling kind of just, all right, Eric's not a star, let's leave him behind. There was the token mediation class, but that was kind of not really effective. We had this ongoing neuroinflammation feedback loop, which was squashing my left brain activity, ramping up my stress, creating eczema all over my face and body, which was fun to try and socialize with. So you'd tend to just sort of retreat into your own little isolated cave and not move out of it. But it is the sort of thing where if we knew more, or we had Simplr Health back then, where someone comes into the network and goes, okay, this is Eric, what's wrong with him? Okay, there's a neurological imbalance, but we've also got this massive amount of inflammation running around his brain. Let's solve that riddle. get parasite under control. Now we can start to rebuild his brain without the ongoing fire, and then chemically, it would have been a smoother sailing. Because I only really figured it out in my late 20s, conveniently enough, about 3 or 4 years after out of uni. I'd thank God my wife took good notes. I knew her through uni, and so you cheated off her notes mostly.
Yeah, right. But what an impact, and it's just the teachers just. I mean, I get it.
No,
you just give up because you don't know what to do. That you know that there's something else going on, and I think the focus is sometimes on what's going on in a student's social life, like what's going on outside of school. That's I think as teachers, we're really aware of that, and we're good at, say, bringing in those networks. So if there's, low socioeconomic kind of areas, we're good at going, okay, how can we bring in services to support students there? But there's don't think enough awareness of, could there be, I mean, we can't treat it as teachers, but to be aware of it, to say maybe there's something medical going on, what's their diet like, is there an ongoing medical issue that could be treated? So it's not necessarily us solving issues, but kind of like being aware.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's, that awareness of sort of functional health in a broader spectrum, to try and, I guess, this kid's, I can see that he's trying and he's see that for whatever reason, it's just not working. I think the one thing as well, and you're starting to see this a bit like here, where you see like your teacher for year 1, and they do their reports and they've got their thing, and then teacher for year 2 and kindergarten, but kind of tracking that trend of looking at, okay, how did he perform in kindergarten? Is he at the same level, or is he exceeding in year 1 and year 2? Because what I suspect, if we looked at my history, we'd probably find a standard increase in IQ from year 1 to 5. And from year 6 onwards, just crashing. There should be a general trajectory that would be mapped out. There'd be a significant point where it departed from standard trajectory. That inter-year kind of mapping it out would be a good way of saying, okay, why isn't this kid tracking in that they should,
Yeah, it's that integrated approach that's really needed within the school. And like, even before I came into Simplr Health, I kind of had this passion around bringing health and education as disciplines closer together, because I could, like, same with you, like once you have kids, I think there's a bit of an awareness of the gap between those two. I'm calling them, like, there's not much crossover and there's not much conversation between those two areas. And I think, like, kind of maybe psychologically or mental health there is, but in terms of physical health, things like viruses, all of that, there's not that conversation between those two. And I mean, that's why, going to kind of Simplr Health, I was just like so excited to meet you and to see what you were doing and to be a part of, and I'm education advisor now with Simplr Health and contributing a bit. So it's just great for us, experts in our field, in our own fields, to kind of be able to come together and have, conversations like this.
Collaborate. But that's, I mean, to be fair, when I did my, first round of lockdown where we had to do homeschooling, that stuff is hard. Being a teacher, you guys do not get paid nearly as much as you should. Like, that was a battle. And I can see, like, that was with one kid. So times about 15 in the class, I can kind of see what, some of these things might get missed. But I think there is certainly a broader look at health that should be integrated, and that's where I think what's going to be interesting, and to segue to one of our other questions, we're seeing kids that are either sub-performers, and that's either, okay, they've got some primitive reflexes that never got integrated, and there's a big question on why that happens, but inflammation certainly has a big part to play in holding back kids' development or driving those anxious responses. The part of the brain where all of the flight-fight reflexes live has a lot of receptor for IL-6, which is one of our inflammatory cytokines. So anything that creates an inflammatory response really does ramp up stress. And as soon as you ramp up stress chronically with these chronic infections, frontal lobe activity is going to start to dampen down as the brain or the body starts to go into to survive tiger in the room. So with like all of this damp weather that we're having in Sydney at the moment, mold sensitivity is going to be a huge problem in the next couple of months. So usually everyone's got a pretty robust immune system, hopefully. But as soon as you get a little bit of a mold sensitivity, and it's everywhere at the moment, then we're living in an environment that's creating an ongoing inflammatory response in the brain, which is only going to make things a little bit worse. But that's where, so to go from there, if we've got mold creating a inflammatory response, you can't really inflame the brain without inflaming the gut lining or the body, and vice versa. So that's where as you get one type of inflammatory irritation, the potential for developing multiple sensitivities starts to go up. So that's where, like with me, and we see it with other kids that have got different sorts of gut infections, where you start out with, I'm a little bit sensitive to gluten, and then a year or two later, all right, dairy, and then corn, and then tomato, and then salmon, and then like the list just gets longer and longer and longer with what the kids are now having a response to. And that's where things like, potentially we're going to see it the same with COVID. As soon as there's a virus that has an impact on smell and taste, so that's where the virus has to be making its way through into the nervous system. So something that's creating a neuroinflammatory response does have the potential for creating that chronic brain inflammation, similar to a chronic gut infection like a parasite or Epstein-Barr. So yeah, potentially, and hopefully it seems to be that, you know, COVID doesn't seem to be hitting kids too hard, but certainly adult population, I think we're going to see a whole wave of post-viral fatigue or post-viral style problems off the back of COVID and or bloody mold.
Right. So what are those symptoms the same with both, say, mold and viruses like COVID? So
this is the problem with brains. Every brain is a unique snowflake.
Right.
So it's partially the same problem with concussion research at the moment. So you can irritate the brain in identical clones, but the symptoms that they're going to manifest be completely different. And to use that analogy of like kids when they're growing up, we've got strengths and weaknesses. So some networks are going to be more robust than others. So if you get a neuroinflammatory response, the weaker networks are going to be the ones that are going to start to manifest symptoms more so than the stronger networks. So for some kids that have that little bit of anxiety in their makeup, potentially, we're going to see an uptick in that. And other kids that have got a bit of a weakness in attention networks, then we're going to see ADD, ADHD start to manifest itself. So it really depends on everyone's specific neurological strengths and weaknesses, which is why, from a research point of view, this stuff starts a little bit complicated, because we can't just go, oh, okay, this person's got long COVID, they're going to have A, B, and C, or this person's got, you know, Epstein-Barr or chronic glandular fever, and okay, they'll have these symptoms. So mixed and varied, which from a research point of view makes things tricky to try and identify.
And the way to treat that then, though, is that, I mean, are there things that we can do, like is diet, will diet, like correcting your diet, have an impact then on the inflammatory response?
Almost certainly. So there's some things, well, that also comes down to if yourself or your kid is having a inflammatory response to what's in their diet. So as soon as you get one irritant, the likelihood of developing secondary and a whole list of irritants goes up. But finding what you're sensitive to and getting away from it is step one. So that's where elimination diets can be helpful. But, you know, if you've ever tried to take an 8-year-old through an elimination diet, then you deserve a medal, because that's a nightmare.
My 7-year-old's
Good
diet
luck.
isn't an elimination diet. I mean, he eats about 5 things. What would I say?
But there are food tests where you can look to see what you're sensitive to. But
yeah,
it also comes down to, like, if you're eating, you know, sugars and a crap diet and spiking your blood sugar levels, that's also going to create havoc. So yeah, cleaning up diet is certainly a big part.
Yeah.
I
was talking to Dean about. Sorry, I was talking to Dean about kids' mental health and like COVID and the impact that's going to have. And you know how straight he is. He just said we should just be spending the money on changing what they offer kids in restaurants. What's on all those kids' meals? They should just be eating what adults eat. It's ridiculous.
Get rid of nuggets and chips, you're saying?
Yeah.
Kids are going to starve everywhere. Well, yeah, like food's certainly probably the easiest way of influencing universal health for the kids and adults.
Yeah.
The other one that's got some good evidence for it from a getting rid of inflammation is either heat shock or cold shock, or both.
Right.
So that's where like infrared saunas or Swedish saunas, some form of heat shock to the body.
Yeah.
And then cold exposure. So whether you just jump in a cold bath, cold shower, the two together seem to be more effective than either individually. But those styles of things do activate certain genes that are helpful for wrapping up or getting rid of inflammation. There's a lot of anti-inflammatory components to that, as well as stimulating the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is involved with calming down your stress reflexes. So that's where that heat shock, cold shock can, from a neurological point of view, help to mitigate some of that stress response. But it also helps with getting rid of inflammation that might be occurring from your mold or food or COVID or insert concussion, whatever is irritating you. And I think from memory, I read a couple of years ago, don't quote me, but I think they were looking at the world ranked, you know, country by country best education system, or what kids had the highest performance from a education point of view. I think it was like Sweden that came up number one. And when they looked at what these kids were doing at school, a lot of it was sauna, and then they're running from the sauna out to play in the snow.
Wow.
And they're I think they also, like, there was no schooling after lunch, something like that. Like the front half of the day was stacked with learning, and then it was a lot of play and a lot of movement, combined with this hot cold, which is part of their culture. So I thought, you know, that's pretty cool.
Actually, because that reminds me, because I did want to ask you about that, because often in the media there is stuff around, you know, needing to start the day with math or English, because that's when kids are more attentive. But I think in one conversation we had, you thought it actually was better to have play first and to stimulate kind of the brain activity and body movement before you went into learning.
Yeah, well, for me, like almost across the board, a lot of the kids that are coming in with these issues, and you know, I am seeing a bit of a skewed population of kids where it's only problem kids that are coming in, but a lot of the kids that are coming in who need help are showing that their right brain is the one that's delayed. So right brain gets more activity with moving and running and hanging on monkey bars. So by activating that right brain, we're getting a little bit closer to left brain, right brain balance. So theoretically, we would see that by doing that, the attention immediately after that should be higher. So that's where, like, if kids are getting 30 minutes early and they're running around with their mates, then that first hour would be a good, let's do left brain style stuff, maths, reading, whatever. And it's again immediately after lunchtime. But I think we were having a chat about this, that if you do have those kids that have a inflammatory response to something in their diet and their lunchbox is filled with crap, then trying to sit them down to do maths immediately after lunchtime is, if their brain's inflamed, it's not going to happen. But that would be a neat way of saying, okay, little Johnny is great with maths in the morning, but we try and do maths after lunchtime or after recess. We can't do it. Okay, there's something going on with Johnny from an inflammatory point of view. Let's talk to Simplr Health and see what can be done.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I wonder whether there's a study around behavior, changes in the day in terms of diet. Anyway, well, that's a little research project we can do. Something in that. Okay, this is awesome. So the other thing, we talk about is sleep deprivation, and I know I've reached out to you a couple of times going, Eric, I can't sleep, and I still haven't done that allergy test that you recommend that I do. But what's the impact though of sleep deprivation or long-term, insomnia, or long-term insomnia? What's the impact on the brain?
I'm going to say that I read a research paper, but what I actually mean is I saw a TikTok video they talked about it.
Science communication at its best. That's what Dr. Carl would say.
That's honesty. Honesty. But they looked at the statistics for hospitalized or cardiac arrests in the day after, or the 3 days after daylight savings comes in versus the 3 days after daylight savings goes away. So that loss 1 hour's sleep when daylight saving kicks in, there was a 27% increase in cardiac arrests for those 3 days immediately afterwards. And there was a drop in 21% on average for cardiac arrests on the other side, where you get an extra hour of sleep. So the impact on sleep is pretty high. So acute sleep loss, certainly, I mean, it's, trying to function on low sleep, even short term is not great. But to go over your question a bit more thoroughly, so the first, there is a bit of variability with this, but the first 6 hours of sleep are generally mainly body repair. But then the last 2 to 3 hours of sleep in a 9 hour window is brain repair. So that's when your brain typically does most of its conversion of short-term memories into long-term memories. It gives your brain a chance to mop up all of the metabolic waste from the thinking of the day. So if you're sleeping less than 6 hours, you might be doing enough body repair, but you're not doing enough neurological repair. So that's where if you're short term, and that's assuming that you've got quite good sleep when you are sleeping. So the big thing that people need to be aware of is like if you snore, you've got a sleep problem. So that obstruction to your airway is going to create a bit of a stress response. Your brain's thinking you're getting choked. So if your brain thinks you're getting choked, you're not deep sleeping. You'll have frequent wake ups during the night. If you wake up a few times to go to the toilet, what's going on there is potentially your airways are closing up with an inflammatory response. You're snoring. Brain thinks you're getting choked. It hits you with a dose of adrenaline to wake you up and fight off the tiger. But when you ramp up your sympathetic activity to that level, you also void. So it's like, oh, I need to go to the toilet. It's not that you woke up because you need to go to the toilet. It's that you kicked off a massive stress response, and your body's going, we need to get rid of what's in our bowels so that we can run away from the tiger. So that's where sure you've got ideally that 8 hours of sleep a night, which is not easy to do in this day and age. But also if you find that you're having frequent wake ups, then or snoring or mouth breathing, they're all indicators that there's something going on with your nasal passages, and that potentially could be deviated septum or polyps or some sort of physical obstruction to your airways, or it could be signs of a inflammatory response. So like I'm a good candidate for this because I know that if I'm a bit naughty and I have a bit of gluten, I don't sleep very well for the few nights because my sinuses start to swell up. Yeah, anyone who's got sort of chronic airway issues, that sort of sinus health is to be looked at. And that's where sleep trackers like the Whoop band, I think the Apple Watch does a good job of it as well. But anything that tracks sleep is good feedback to say, okay, I had a whiskey and then slept like crap. Okay, let's not do that.
I think that's why I've avoided doing the test, because I think it's going to say red wine does that for me, but I like red wine.
Well, then this is what I do. It's like, okay, if I know I'm going to be naughty, I just level up my antioxidant on so there's a few supplements that are quite good. So Quistin is a supplement. It's just an antioxidant, but that's been shown to be quite effective at controlling the inflammation, ramping up stress response while you're asleep. There's a few other ones like that you can do if you know you're being naughty. But on the topic of kids should not snore. So that's where if your kid's snoring, there's something going on. And that's either a dentition issue. It's either there's a couple of good dentists around who are looking at sort of the development of the jaw. So if your kid has crooked teeth, there's something going on with the development of that jaw network, which is going to have an impact on sinuses, which is going to have an impact on sleep. So that's where sometimes we're going to see these behavioral issues aren't to do with a brain imbalance. It's a sleep obstruction, or the kid's not sleeping at all. And then we need to chase down airways and inflammation control and talk to Dean about diet stuff.
Okay. Your other expertise is in concussion, and you do a lot of work there and have a lot of positive impact on people with that. But you combine a lot of technologies, right? And you talked a bit about this with the kids, and you do this as well with rehab on traumatic brain injuries as well.
Yeah. So a big part of what we look at, like there are lots of people that are doing really good work with concussion rehab. And then you get people that are specialists from a sort of the endocrine or the hormonal imbalances that occur with the concussion. Some people are really good with the ocular issues that go along with the concussions, but I sort of cross several fields with that stuff, and then know enough about some of those systems to know, okay, this person needs to see a specialist in this area. But a lot of the times with those sorts of concussion cases that come in, again, because every brain is a bit of a unique snowflake, we've got to assess everything from the brainstem up. So looking at someone's sense of balance. So quite often with concussion, you can't really shake the brain without there being a bit of a twist component. So your brain is slightly asymmetrical, where your left frontal lobe is a little bit larger than your right frontal lobe. So even if you do shake the head straight forward and back, there's going to be a little bit of a rotation. So when we look at where that rotation impacts, it's all down through the brainstem. So quite often the symptoms that we see with concussions or anyone who's had a knock is that there's issues around the autonomic nervous system. So whether that's they stand up too quick and they feel really lightheaded, or for whatever reason their resting heart rate has gone from 60 and now it's just sitting up at 90 or 100 for no reason, or they walk up a flight of stairs and they're hitting 120 beats. So they're all signs that the autonomic nervous system has been impacted. And a lot of the nuclei or the parts of the nervous system that are involved with regulating that are all in the brainstem, which is the part that's being twisted. So for me, treating concussions, we looking at it from almost the reverse order to other people, where we're assessing brainstem first. Okay, let's get the autonomics under control. Then let's look at balance and get the balance systems under control. And then let's do some brain mapping and seeing which areas of the cortex are misbehaving. But that's another one where you've got to have access to different types of technology, and dealing with this stuff. It's knowing the right concoction of transcranial laser therapy, direct current stimulation, sometimes oxytherapy, the hyperbaric oxygen, vestibular rehab, sensory motor integration. There's a list of things, but it's
like the layman term of that is the laser thing that you put. So
that's the laser thing.
The lasers in the head. people
Yes.
go on the Brain and Body Health Instagram page. Eric's got a heap of really cool videos that show what he does with kids and adults to do that. So it's kind of like the lasers. They go in the tank. And also you're doing a kind of lot of physio exercises. So I know with my kids, when I tell them I'm going to see a chiropractor, and they just have this image that you're just like cracking their back, and I was like, it doesn't even touch their back. You're kind of doing a lot of physio style, in my mind, like they look like kind of physio style exercises, and you do that with brain injuries too, right?
Yeah, well, my argument, and this is for neuro rehab as well as stock standard musculoskeletal rehab, but if you're any good, you're reading the research, and that's where, like, if someone comes in with low back pain, what does the research suggest is the most appropriate way for fixing this person? And that might be just exercise rehab, which is, you know, classically under that physio banner, or we might be doing some dry needling or some laser therapy or chiropractic manipulations. But it really should be that if you see a good chiro or a good physio or insert therapist, the approach to rehab should be identical, because the research is the same for all of us. We should all be looking at this from a multimodal point of view. The whole, you know, this is a chiropractor and chiropractors just crack things. I mean, there are people out there that are just doing that, which is fine, and that works for some people, but same with physios. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of physios out there that are just doing physio stuff, but it's the mix of the two is where a majority of the evidence is supporting and saying multimodal approaches is where it's at. So for me, people, you know, I get that all the time where it's like, oh yeah, you know, he's a chiropractor, but he hasn't cracked me. Okay,
what's going on?
It's, you know, it's my registration. It's not you're not just who I am. You know, there's lots of stuff that you know, I've been throwing at people to get those results as fast as we possibly can.
And that's what I just find so fascinating about you, is that you like, and I think it goes to your story that you shared about your dad and about your own journey at school, is that you just want to help people. And you say that, I think I made a crack about, because I came in and you bought another technology. I was like, oh, more tech, Eric, you know, more tech. And you said, well, I think it's okay because I'm helping people. And I was like, yeah, touche, fair enough. But it's like, whatever you can do to kind of treat patients, and you kind of treat them all individually and what's going on for them. So just, you know, kind of find, like, current research, what's going to make the biggest difference for the people that are coming in your clinic.
Yeah, and again, I think that's it's really be like, this is the only thing that I do, having that thought process of, let's just try different things, because again, no two people coming in with back pain are going to be exactly the same. No two people with developmental issues as kids are going to be exactly the same, but it's having the scope to know what's going to work best for this patient. So that's where you know, there's some approaches that are just pretty linear, and they're going to work for some people because that's all they needed, but and that's where, you know, I certainly know good at, but I also know what I'm poor at, and that's having that access to a group of therapists, so that we can say, okay, this is Joe, I've done what I can, but I'm running into a barrier with this. Who's got a solution? And then just being open enough to go, all right, let's go talk to Dean now, or let's go talk to Remy now, or having that group approach to care.
I could talk to you forever, but I think we have to stop now.
I
mean, you've got stuff to do. You said, oh, I've got to map the brain so you can make more games or something.
One of my side projects, trying to develop a virtual reality program to make this stuff more available at home. Because the other thing that irritates me is so, like, you need to bring your kids into the clinic so that they can get rehab, and we're doing stuff at home, but the most effective stuff is happening in clinic. So that means that my ability to help people is capped by how many people I can fit in per week. Whereas realistically, if we had access to some form of brain training program that was a bit more targeted, that we could roll out en masse where you rent a headset. That's kind of the vision and where we're going.
That's what we should bring into schools, Eric.
Yeah, but that's also where I'm now currently bashing my head against a multi-Excel sheet trying to map out every area of the brain. It's yeah. So I was really looking forward to this chat.
Great.
To put on that task, but back to the grindstone.
Sorry, you have to go back to it. But thank you. It's been such a joy to talk to you properly, rather than in between you treating my kids and me going, what about this, Eric? What about this? So thank you for that opportunity. And, please, if you're dealing with anything to do with your health and wellbeing, reach out to Simplr Health and the team. And Eric, it's at Brain and Body Health at Gladesville in New South Wales. He's doing incredible work. Follow him on Instagram. It's so fascinating. Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
I'll see you next week in the clinic.
Yeah, catch you then.
Bye.